Senator Rubio, welcome.
Thank you.
Today we're here to talk about education. Define the problem around public education today as you see it.
Well, there's several. I mean, one of it, of course, is that it's not adequately preparing our children to succeed at the next level. You know, we have some of the finest higher education institutions in the world, by evidenced by the fact that the wealthiest and most powerful people on the planet send their kids to go to school here, but you have far too many young people that enter that not prepared to learn. So that's part of it. Part of it is parents have very few choices or opportunities to choose where their kids go to school. This is particularly true for low-income parents who are often trapped sending their kids to a failing school because the government doesn't let them choose where their children go to school. And then part of it is a mismatch between the skills and the knowledge required to succeed in the 21st century and what our schools are teaching. So there's several issues going on in the K-12 system that are of deep concern.
So we think about change, we talk about change, but there are barriers that exist that make it very hard, especially in K-12. What are the barriers?
Well, one is just the massive educational bureaucracy that's resistant to change, and a lot of it is represented by the teachers unions around the country that don't want to see any changes. Part of it is outdated leaders that just don't recognize how much the world has changed and is changing. And so it's difficult to get such a massive system like K-12, which is broken up into thousands of individual school districts around the country, to quickly change direction. So it's going to take strong leadership and real innovation to make that happen.
So fast forward, November 2016, you've just been elected president. How important do you see this issue to the future of this country? Do you want to be the education president?
Yeah, I do, but I think it's important. One of the best things that a president can do in order to move forward on K-12 is not to involve the federal government in its details. Allow that to reside with the local school districts and at the local level, because it is at the states and local level where you're going to see the innovation necessary to improve. The one area where I do think we can be helpful is for students that want to go into vocational training. I think we need more of that for 15, 16, and 17 years olds who have decided that they want to fix airplanes for a living or become a machinist or a welder, to open up the Pell Grant program so they can use it to go to high school in the morning and then trade school in the afternoon, and they can graduate job ready, which it would be a huge dynamic shifting development in America.
But at K-12, we still have about 40% of our students who aren't reading or able to do math at proficiency.
Yeah.
So as President of the United States, and you don't believe the federal government should be that involved, I mean, you've gone as far as to call for the abolishment of the Department of Education.
Yes.
What do you do to make these changes happen?
Well, again, I mean, the first thing you do is you have a president that understands that those changes will never come from the federal government. It has to be about ensuring that local school districts and states are making those changes by devolving power back to them. The one thing I have proposed is opening up a new pathway to school choice by creating a corporate scholarship program where American companies, in lieu of a portion of their taxes being paid to the government, would pay it into a local not-for-profit scholarship organization that gives scholarships to low-income families to send their children to a private school of their choice. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet that's going to solve everything, but it will provide yet one more avenue by which low-income parents can have access to a better education than the one their kids are getting now.
Do you see, would you ever consider using federal dollars to try to incentivize states to adopt school choice programs, to expand charters?
The problem with that is that if federal dollars that start out as incentives become mandates, the federal government has a long tendency and a long history of sending dollars down as a suggestion and then ultimately becoming a mandate with not strings attached, chains attached and ropes. And I just don't want us to have a national school board. So anything we can do to spur innovation is positive, but I think one of the best things we can do to spur innovation in K-12 is ensure the federal government is not controlling it or mandating it or providing money to states with strings attached. So it's largely about devolving money and sending that money in block grant form to the local communities, to the school districts, and to the states so they can put in place the kind of innovative changes we need to improve K-12 in this country.
Hillary Clinton was at one point a supporter of charter schools and some of the ideas in the education reform movement. President Obama has been, throughout his presidency, pretty supportive of many of those changes. But recently, Mrs. Clinton said, you know, charters are cherry-picking kids, and has received the endorsement of both of the teachers' unions. Do you see Democrats as being able to think about the future in the terms you're talking about, or are they too beholden to?
You know, to be fair, when out in Florida, I was in the state legislature for 8.5 years. When we started in Florida, every Democrat was against any school choice, charter schools, parental choice. And then over time, as individual students began to benefit from these programs, we found, for example, a majority of the African American legislators that were Democrats began to become supporters of school choice. So that's a positive development. But you touch on something, and that is the Democratic Party relies heavily on contributions and support from teacher unions around the country, who quite frankly are one of the biggest impediments to educational reform in this country. And so she's a captive of that. They've taken over the Democratic Party's educational agenda, and Hillary Clinton, who's probably going to be the Democratic nominee, is not going to be able to be an innovator on K through 12 because she's fully owned by the teachers union when it comes to K through 12 education.
Common Core has been controversial within the Republican Party. Your mentor, Jeb Bush, who's been a real leader on education, I think, for years, has stayed with Common Core as the idea of a way to get all states to raise their standards. Where are you?
The Common Core is about curriculum reform, and I'm a supporter of curriculum reform.
But Common Core is about trying to set a benchmark that
Right.
everyone could aim for.
But the benchmarks drive the curriculum. So in essence, if you say we want to become more proficient at this or that, then the curriculum would respond to it. My problem with that, of course, is that every time, if you create it as a national standard, the next step is going to be the federal government uses it as a mandate mechanism. They're going to tell states, we want you to specifically do this if you want our money, and that's what I want to avoid. Now, when I was Speaker of the House in Florida, we improved standards in our curriculum, but we did it at the state level, and I think that's where it belongs. And I don't think we need national standards. I think that the competition between individual states and school districts is what's going to drive excellence.
If you could do one thing in this country to change our public schools that would particularly benefit low-income kids who are, treated unequally compared to everyone else, what would you do?
Well, clearly school choice and empowering parents to put their kids in the appropriate setting. For some parents, it might be another public school across town that they think is better. For others, it might be a faith-based education. Allowing parents to become the ultimate and final arbiter and decision maker on where their kids are getting their education is, for me, deeply empowering. Most Americans have that choice because they're rich or because they moved to a better neighborhood, but low-income parents do not. And that's, in my mind, wrong. It's immoral that the only people in America who have no control over where their kids go to school are low-income parents. But I think, I have 4 teachers in my family. The one thing I know for sure is the breakdown in society is a major contributor to the lack of educational achievement. No matter how much you pay teachers or how much you reform the curriculum, if kids are coming from an unstable background where learning is not valued, where they live in a dangerous neighborhood in substandard housing with parents that are either not around or not engaged, these kids are going to struggle. And we've got to recognize that reality. And while government can't do anything to turn it around, we should certainly not be doing anything that's an impediment to strong families and strong family life.
But just to go back to what you said, if you believe in local control in a lot of states, New York and California, that means union control, which makes advancing choices, options for parents a lot harder.
Well, again, that's why I think the corporate scholarship program that I've talked about, which is modeled after what we've done in Florida, allows individual companies, instead of paying a portion of their federal income tax to the federal government, could be able to contribute it to a scholarship organization who in turn could provide scholarship to students in these jurisdictions who can use that money to go to a private school. But ultimately what happens in many cases is people are unhappy with their local school district and their choices, and they move. And that's why you've seen population leave places like this and move to other communities and states where the schools are better. And in many instances they're better because parents have choices, and innovation and competition is driving excellence.
I know you said you wanted to abolish the Department of Education. Do you plan to, or would what would you do with it if it stuck around?
Well, we don't need a Department of Education. It has some important functions. For example, the student loan programs, the Pell Grant, we could transfer that to Treasury. Other departments can run it. My problem with the Department of Education is the federal government was never intended to be involved in K through 12 education. It was a limited government designed for the limited and specific enumerated purposes. K through 12 belongs at the local level because parents have much more influence over a school board or over a state legislature than they will ever have over Congress or over unelected bureaucrats sitting in a massive building in Washington, D.C. This is not about ideology. This is about the practical reality that why do we have a Department of Education when the federal government really has no role to play in K through 12 education?
I've asked some of the other candidates who they would think about for that job, for being
Well, we
their
don't have an
education
agency.
secretary.
Yeah, we don't have an
agency.
agency.
Who do you talk to, though? And
Well,
listen to
assuming
on
we
these issues?
can't repeal it, you look for someone who's a true innovator that shares my views about local control, someone who will turn that department into a facilitator of local control as opposed to an impediment of it, someone who views their role as limiting the power and the scope of the Department of Education. Not because, an ideological pursuit, but because we understand that if you want excellence in K through 12, it must be driven by innovation at the local and state level, and that the competition between cities, counties, and states is what's going to drive those jurisdictions to improve the way they teach children.
You keep mentioning innovation. Another place where we're facing these barriers, it makes it very hard to get some of the exciting technological advances into the classroom.
Right.
But when you look at some of the things going on that are more innovative around the country in K through 12, what makes you excited?
Well, if you think about 25 or 30 years ago, I think back when I was growing up, if I wanted to learn about something, I'd have to go to the school library, and hopefully they had a book on topic that wasn't outdated, or if not, I had to convince my parents to buy a book for me. Today, if you want to learn about something, you can learn about it in seconds. And so because the internet and the access to this information has basically flattened information flow, it's available to anybody now. This was a huge dynamic shifting development. We have to somehow figure out how to get that into classrooms. And that, by the way, should be reflected in the local curriculums too, because as the world changes, what we're teaching, the skills we emphasize, the practical skills we emphasize, are going to have to keep pace with an economy that is not just changing, but will change faster than economies and markets have ever changed before.
Senator Rubio, thank you.
Thank you.